But anyways, another huge problem is an issue called irreducible complexity. Okay, an irreducibly complex system is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. That sounds nice and complicated, doesn't it? Okay? Let's take, for instance, the internal combustion engine in your car. Okay? If you change the size of the piston, okay, you have to change the camshaft, the rings, the block, the valves, the cooling system, the fuel system, et cetera, for the new engine to actually function. Okay? If you take the pistons out, you don't go very far. Okay? That's basically the idea behind irreducible complexity. Darwin wrote in 1859, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Okay? We have to give him the benefit that he's talking in 1859. They didn't know a whole lot about how animals worked and stuff in 1859, much compared to the information that we have today. What would this be? Chromosomes, okay? This is one of my favorite pictures of all time. Does anybody know what this is? This is visual proof of a double helix. Okay, Watson and Crick would have gone crazy to see this picture. Okay, so that's God's fingerprint right there, but it doesn't get any better than that. So we have our double helix structure. Okay, a bunch of chromosomes. These are actually compressed DNA. Okay, and then you have this whole engine that's used to reproduce it and everything. Horribly complex. Things that we have no concept of how it actually comes together and works. We just know that it does. Right down to the physical way that the individual atoms in DNA interact controls everything. And it's interesting too. So the molecular and protein interactions of DNA are so incredibly complicated that the accuracy and self-regulation of the DNA-based cellular engine alone are far superior to anything that mankind has ever dreamed of, much less actually built. Okay, for instance, DNA here, okay, is in its compressed form. It sits in the nucleus of the cell uncompressed. It looks like a bowl of spaghetti, basically, is a good way to describe it. Did you know that if you place each strand of DNA end to end, it comes to about 6 feet long in one cell? Okay, so take all the DNA out of a cell, stretch it end to end, it's about 6 feet long. Interesting thing about that is you have about 5 trillion cells in the average human body. Okay, some of us do have a few more cells than others. Okay, the present company not included. Okay, all DNA put together. Okay, if you put all the DNA in a human body together, that comes out to about 300 trillion feet. Okay, that's a big number. To help you understand how big that number is, the distance comes to about 56.8 trillion miles. Okay, the distance from here to the sun, does anybody know how far that is? Very close, actually 93 on average, but it can be more than 96 even at some points in time. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So distance to the sun is 93 million miles. That means that if you take the DNA in one human being, put it end to end, it'll stretch from here to the sun and back 305,000 times. Okay? And that's how much DNA is in you. Okay? Much less the fact that we got, 7.4 billion people on the planet. Okay? You could probably take all the DNA, put it end to end, and wrap the entire Earth in it 20 feet deep, no problem. Okay? And we're walking around with it all day long. Okay? So, that's how big of a number it is. In the human genome, the DNA works by base pairs. It has the A to T and the C to G, thymine, adenine, cytosine, and guanine. Okay, your pyrimidines and your purines. That basically, these forms what are called base pairs. Okay, the human genome has basically 3,234,830,000 base pairs. Okay, that's a lot. For instance, there's 2,700 languages on the planet Earth right now, about, okay? The 2,700-ish, okay? Do you agree with that, Mark? Okay. English is actually considered to have basically the most words because we'll take words from anybody's language and include it in ours. It's a given that we have about 1 million words in the English language right now. Okay. Interestingly enough, we create a new word about every 98 minutes. Most languages have about 150,000. For instance, French has about 100,000 words. German has about 155,000 words. The closest to us is probably the Chinese, which gets a little complicated, but they figure they have about 850,000 unique words. If you take all the words in all the languages on the planet and add them together, it still falls short of how many base pairs are in your DNA, okay, by a lot, okay? So there is more language going on in each cell than there is on the face of the planet, period, okay? And that all just sprung into existence, no problem, okay? Whew, I'm glad they figured that out, okay. Now, let's move on to another issue of irreducible complexity, okay? We have the human eye, which is a fascinating structure. Let's take a closer look at just the front of the eye. This is the anatomy of the front of the eye, okay? One of my favorite structures is this one right here. It's called the canal of Schlemm. Does anybody know what the canal of Schlemm does? It controls the pressures of the fluid inside the eyeball. If the canal of Schlemm gets plugged up and is not working correctly, and you get to the point that your eyeball pops out of your head. That's why the canal of Schlemm is pretty cool. Okay. Yeah. So now you know what I think about it, right? Wrong button. Okay. So not only do we have the front of the eye, we have the retina, okay, which is basically what's responsible for taking the light and transferring it into an electrical pulse that the brain understands. So the retina takes and sends it back to the brain. Okay, and then you have the brain structure that takes all that information and breaks it down into things like motion, okay, outline, depth and shades and colors, okay, which are all controlled by different parts of the brain. Now, let's back up here one second. The evolutionists often claim that the primate eye is the most evolved eye on the planet, okay? But many have mislabeled primitive eyes, okay, which have distinct advantages over ours. For example, the human eyeball can register about 60 frames per second, okay? So 60 pictures per second. Bees can process at about 300 frames per second, way more than we can, okay? For instance, movies are made in 24 frames per second, okay? So to us, the brain actually weaves all those still pictures together and creates fluid motion. To a bee, it's like flipping through a photo book, okay? It's just so slow. That's why it's hard to swat flies, by the way, okay? Because to them, you're just barely moving, okay? We're like, oh, yeah. Okay. So it gives the illusion of motion. The design innovation in so-called primitive animals is so much more complex than the corresponding structures in our eyes, okay? Yet we're the top of the food chain, evidently. A guy by the name of D.C. Dennett, who was a prominent evolutionist, in a paper entitled The Hoax of Intelligent Design and How It Was Perpetrated, very interesting little article, wrote that the eye lens is exquisitely well designed to do its job. These are his words. Exquisitely well designed to do its job, and the engineering rationale for the details is unmistakable, but no designer ever articulated it. He concludes that the complexity of its design is not real, but an illusion. He uses the term illusion, okay? It's magic. Because evolution explains the eye without the need for a designer. Now what's interesting is in his paper, he stops there. He doesn't go on to explain anything. He just says it's done. Okay, we don't need to talk about this anymore. When a scientist tells you that it's no longer an argument, it's done, that means they've run out of arguments. They have no clue what they're doing, and they've chosen to move on regardless. Okay, those are usually the times when you should pay attention. We did talk about the DNA. What's interesting, there's about 80,000 functional genes in the human genome. 7,500 of which are involved in the regulation of the retina alone. So that's, oops, where did I go? This part here, okay? 7,500 genes are responsible for that. That's more than 10% of our DNA, okay? That's a lot, okay? This didn't just go poof, there it is, okay? It's not like one gene said, oh, there's an eyeball, okay? It's an entire process, and that's just the retina. It doesn't even include what it takes to physically make the eyeball itself, or the separate processing of the brain. It's actually believed now that the issue is not how the eye evolved, but how we came to process the information that the eye puts out. That's infinitely more complicated than just the eyeball itself. And the interesting part of that is they believe how many different types of eyes are there. This is actually what's called the A through L chart. It's the 12 basic types of eyes on the planet that we've discovered. There's 12 distinct different types grouped into 3 completely different methods of operation. In order for evolution to be true, these would have all had to have evolved separately. The 3 major types themselves, you would have had to have coordinated evolution of all 3 types independently. So this requires not only one vastly amazing miracle, but 3, okay, at one time, just to even get off the ground. That's how crazy it is. Oh, well, my cat jumping out of the box didn't work out too well that time. Yeah. Okay. So, not only do you have eyes, we have ears, okay? We've got our tongue, which is an amazingly complicated device, okay? You've got the human immune system, okay, which basically uses the entire body, okay? You've got things like your lymph nodes, your thymus, your spleen, all the long bones in the body, and then you have individual cells that are part of that, which are involved in your immune system. And on top of that, there's actually this crazy communication system between all the different leukocytes and everything of the immune system called interleukins. And there's 36 interleukins. And they actually hold conversations between the cells. They talk to each other about what to do and what they're doing. They coordinate their efforts. And if you believe in gradualism or evolutionism, then that all just kind of sprung into existence. It's like some sort of old school telephone that just kind of evolved. Okay, so here we are now. Where'd I go? Where's my mouse, dude? So, another interesting aspect of that is that you've got another complication of irreducible complexity are the sexes themselves. Okay. In reality, in terms of evolution, sexual reproduction doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it requires 2 organisms to come together. You can reproduce your own gene pool far quickly and more accurately if you're doing it all by yourself. So in reality of gradualism or evolutionism, we should actually be all producing asexually, and there'd be all sorts of pasture cancer running around. And one of them would stay at home and watch Duck Dynasty all day while the other worked. So, it's a rather obvious problem, and not only the issue of physical organism to organism contact, but the machinery that allows sexual reproduction to occur itself at the cellular level is outrageously complicated. It's so complicated that it doesn't take much to hose it up. And the issue there is, since it didn't take much to hose it up, how did it manage to last this long? And how come we're not overtaken by asexually reproducing organisms? There's actually a very brilliant paper that was written that was what happens if you had a human population and all of a sudden one of the guys was able to reproduce himself. How long would it take him to take over the whole population? And it's actually about 1,000 life cycles. And then basically everybody in the world would be asexually reproducing. So it's an interesting problem that they have 0 answers for whatsoever. Matter of fact, I went and looked for one of their answers, okay, and I read this interesting paper called The Origin of Sexual Reproduction. They said in the eukaryotic fossil record, eukaryotes are basically things that have DNA in a nucleus, whereas prokaryotes are outside a nucleus, in case you were just wondering. Sexual reproduction first appeared by 1,200 million years ago in the Proterozoic eon. All sexually reproducing eukaryotic organisms derive from a common ancestor, which was a single-celled species. Many protists reproduce sexually, as do the multicellular plants, animals, and fungi. Sounds like a nice concept. Organisms need to replicate their genetic material in an efficient and reliable manner. The necessity to repair genetic damage is one of the leading theories explaining the origin of sexual reproduction. Diploid individuals can repair a damaged section of their DNA via homologous recombination. Since there are 2 copies of the gene in a cell and 1 copy is presumed to be undamaged, a mutation in a haploid individual, on the other hand, is more likely to become resident, as the DNA repair machinery has no way of knowing what the original undamaged sequence was. The most primitive form of sex may have been one organism with damaged DNA replicating an undamaged strand from a similar organism in order to repair itself. Does anybody see anything wrong with this? What? What do you see wrong with it? Yeah, one of the big deals is right here. The necessity to repair genetic damage is one of the leading theories explaining the sign of sexual reproduction, the origin of sexual. That right there should cause you to stop reading anything that these people write, okay? Because what they just said is that by need, evolution occurred, which is by fundamental not part of evolution. Okay? That right there throws the whole thing hogwash out the window. Plus, what's interesting is the explanation down here. They just said up here that the organism would have no way of knowing whether or not its DNA was damaged, but down here they have it copying another piece of DNA because it was damaged. They argue against themselves in their own argument. It makes zero sense. And this is what this is the problem with college kids, and it was a problem that I was susceptible to at the time. In college, you read this and you go, okay, that makes sense, we're done, we move on. Whereas in reality, and what's odd is one of the first things they teach you in science is how to read without believing, okay? You're taught that every single paper you read, you're taught to read critically. You look for the problems. You try to figure out why it doesn't work. Any laboratory output or anything, you're taught to understand what they did wrong and find that first, except for when it comes to the origin of the universe. Evidently, that is a no man's land that we're supposed to turn off on. So that's how they go from there. What's interesting aspect of that is actually almost all living organisms today have a refined genetic engine that is specifically designed to reduce and eliminate mutations. Okay, this means that almost all life, especially higher order life forms, have a very specific dedicated system for the sole purpose of reducing and eliminating the exact type of mutations necessary for evolution to occur. Okay, we specifically have machinery that keeps evolution from happening. Yet that must have evolved, which, wow. Okay, we need a 10-year-old going, what? Okay, it's a big deal. Oh yeah, isn't he cute? Yeah. Yeah. I look for, because I'm a dog guy, I look for dog ones, and the dog ones just don't work the same. They're just not near as good. So, how do they try to sneak around this with complex complication? Okay, that is a play on words that I really like. The response that they use is called quantum evolution. Okay, which basically means that comparatively rapid transition from one stable type of biological adaptation to another, distinctly different type under the influence of some strong selective pressure. So what this means is that an animal was on a cliff, and he lived on the edge of the cliff, and he thought it'd be really nice that he could see the edge of the cliff so he didn't fall off. Through that strong selective pressure, he developed an eyeball instantly, okay, and was able to use it, and that's quantum evolution, okay. I have one response to that, and that's Rambo Kitty. This is my favorite of all time. I actually have this on my desktop, and I just stare at it. And, I think he's hilarious. Wow. Now, let's talk about it this way. Does similarity of design and common genetic code mean a common ancestor. Okay, so here we have a dog. Okay, a dog's eye versus a human's eye. It looks about the same, doesn't it? Okay, let's take a look at a dog's ear. Okay, so it's got the occipitals and everything down here, the auditory tube and everything. We basically have exactly the same bone structure here, okay, and the same processing system and everything. And even this middle ear cavity is down here in humans. Anatomically, it's almost exactly the same. The issue, though, is that does that mean that they have a common ancestor? Okay, or does it not mean that they have a common designer? Okay, when we build a new engine, we don't completely scrap the old one and try to invent a whole new way to do it. Okay, we take that old engine and we improve upon it. Okay, there's no reason to force the Lord to rebuild different ways to do absolutely everything for every single organism. Okay, I would assume on some level that he basically came up with ways to do stuff, and he built systems for doing that, and he compiled all those systems together to make each organism. Okay, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to make a car, which is what they're asking you to do when you believe that this and that were due to distinct evolution from a common ancestor. Now, a few more of the problems. Evolutionists like to say, well, of course we cannot see evolution at work because it takes millions of years. This was a statement that was in that video we watched, okay? Consider this. This is actually one of my own arguments. I would like to see produced and stuff, but I can't get some people to take it up. Evolutionists estimate that it takes about 18 million years to evolve from chimps to humans. Okay, so chimps to humans, 18 million years. The average female chimp in the wild reaches reproductive maturity around the age of 14, basically the same as humans. Okay, that's about 1,285,714 generation cycles. Okay, so they're implying that it took about 1.25 million generation cycles to achieve the evolution from a chimp to a basic human. Okay, that's what they're saying. Does anybody know what this is? Cheetos. If this was in your Cheetos, it'd be a very bad day. Okay. This is bacteria, yep. It's Escherichia coli, okay? One of the fastest reproducing organisms on the face of the planet. What I like to think of is this. The reproductive cycle of E. coli is 17 minutes, okay? That means it reproduces itself every 17 minutes. It's fast, okay? Scientists have been actively culturing and observing E. coli for about 70 years now, okay? So in the laboratory, actively looking at it. That's about 2,164,235 generation cycles, okay? But evolution estimated it only took 1.25 million cycles to get from chimps to humans. So we've been witness to 60% more generations of E. coli, and yet we haven't seen them evolve into anything, okay? So the idea that we haven't been around long enough to watch evolution is total bovine scatology, okay? It does not work. The difference that have developed, you'll get that at home, okay? The differences that have developed are because we have selectively cultivated different strains, which would be the application of an intelligent design upon the organism, and not the product of a blind natural process, okay? So that's actually all I have on that. We have to remember that basically all scientists are starting off with a false pretense. In the end, it's not really a debate over the evidence itself, because the evidence doesn't really say anything. It's just evidence. The debate is over the philosophy of interpreting that evidence. Okay, they consider two causes. They have two types. One would be an intelligent cause. One would be a non-intelligent cause. The problem that they run into is that they immediately discount the intelligent cause. So when they start with there's no intelligent cause and they look at their data, they have to figure out some sort of non-intelligent natural process to make it work, okay? And there lies the rub. They have to find a non-intelligent cause, and the pun there is intended. No matter how far unlikely and or complicated they seem to have to go to explain their evidence. We are not only open to natural causes as Christians, which would be the explanation, but also we can look at the evidence and say that it would appear by the evidence that there are characteristics of an intelligent being involved in this process. Okay? And we allow for that. Inherently, it's a philosophy that is a greater level of understanding in terms of options than the ones that they are using. And that's the significant factor. That you got to remember that science doesn't say anything. Only scientists do. So that's all I have. Any questions? We're going to think about it. You can email me, whatever you need to do. We'll talk about it.
When scientists are trying to date systems, they all want something to it. You just shown the carbon dating isn't what it's supposed to be. Not everything is supposed to go back to the
Mm-hmm.
So anything that they're quoting beyond that, just an assumption that it had been taken down?
Basically, yeah. If they tell you that by carbon dating this thing was 1.27 million years old, they're full of it. They can't even get that far back. Yeah, it's literally not possible to count it. Now, there are other systems. It all falls prey to the same types of problems. If you take that same system and apply it to lead salt production, and there's one that uses argon, and argon dating can go back quite a bit because of its half-life is much longer. But the problem with argon is that it actively leaves an organism all the time. It's not trapped. But they still use it to date stuff like it is. So, you know. Anything else? Yes. That oldest tree, actually, we don't know the exact location. It's in California. They won't tell us because they're afraid people will mess with it.
In California.
Yeah.
And how old was it?
That one is, what, 4,850-ish years?
So if you go by biblical dating, that's around the time
Yeah, right around the time of the end of the flood, you know. And it's actually on a mountain.
So the oldest thing we can find is on top of the mountain, and it dates back to when
The- Yes, yes, yes. It's very interesting. And what's interesting to me is that, you know, the science is inherently in search of answers to the questions. Yet they automatically eliminate half the answers. And they just say that's not possible, which doesn't make any sense at all. And even in terms of just sheer logic, which science is supposed to be fundamentally based on logic, it doesn't make any sense. Occam's razor tells us that evolution is hogwash because it requires literally billions of things to happen, whereas creationism requires one. So it's really not a very good crutch to stand on. So, anything else? Well, here's the thing. You got to remember that you're listening to a group of people that can't figure out who killed JFK. Okay? And we were here and we have it on video. Okay? And they still can't tell you who killed him. Okay? Or how many people were involved. Okay? Yet they're going to tell you how the organism that created the gun evolved on the face of the planet. You know, the organism that created the car, where the steel came from, and all that stuff, but they can't tell you who pulled the trigger. So it really has to come down to a level of belief in who you're talking to start with. So, anyways, that's all I've got. If you have anything, just let me know, and we'll talk about it then. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for just bringing us together, Lord, and for this time that you've given us just to be witness to this, Lord. And thank you for the words that you've spoken here. And just let it serve your people, Lord. And let them use this to go out and fight what is possibly the greatest evil against you, Lord. And that is this notion of evolution and how it just is used constantly to discount your existence, Lord. And I would just ask that you provide us with not only the will and the knowledge to fight that, Lord, but the opportunity. Just bring people into our lives that we can use this every day, Lord, to show them your way. And Lord, if you just bless us with that, Lord, we just promise to be good stewards of that opportunity, Lord, and to take advantage. And with faith, we just believe in you and everything that we have. In the name of our Holy Son, Jesus Christ, all his people said.
Amen. Next week, back in the